CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Lazarus hackers abuse Dell, former Uber security chief found guilty of data breach, and will Twitter finally become Twisla or TwitX? These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines, and now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Pat Benoit, Global VP, GRC and BISO at CBRE. Pat, welcome to the show, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Sean. Looking forward to it.
Our sponsor for today's show is Hunters. Help your SOC mitigate real threats faster and more reliably than SIM. Join us on YouTube Live. Go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop down, and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. It's the third one down. Just click on it to join us. But we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got 20 minutes, so we're going to dive right into the first story. All right. Lazarus hackers abuse Dell driver bug using new FUD module rootkit. The notorious North Korean hacking group Lazarus has been observed installing a Windows rootkit that abuses a Dell hardware driver in a bring-your-own vulnerable driver attack. The spear phishing campaign unfolded in the autumn of 2021, and the confirmed targets, an aerospace expert in the Netherlands and a political journalist in Belgium, were emailed fake job offers at Amazon. Among the tools deployed on this campaign is a new FUD module rootkit that abuses BYOVD technique to exploit a vulnerability in a Dell hardware driver for the first time. So, Pat, a few different spins on this story. Your thoughts on the severity of the attack, the BYOVD concept, or the fact that spear phishing, again, seems to be at the heart of this story?
Well, it seems spear phishing or phishing in general is always at the heart of the story. And it's a little surprising still with so much awareness that we're still caught off guard so many times. But what was interesting to me is I'd be curious to know how they got the admin level access they needed to do a BYOVD type attack. So, what kind of layers in defense didn't exist to be able to prevent that admin escalation that went on. That's where I'd be worried.
Yeah, that is interesting, and Amazon seems to be more and more part of these social engineering attacks as well. Any thoughts on the human element? Is there anything that works? They seem to be becoming more prevalent as well. The social engineering part seems very tough to tackle.
Yeah, social engineering is just getting better. They're getting smarter and smarter, and we're getting in some ways more gullible and more gullible. I mean, one of the recent social engineers that I saw was going after cybersecurity professionals and offering them great jobs, and then going through the interview process and letting it expose all their wonderful secrets in interviews, and then take that information and run. What a great social engineering approach, and yet we as cyber people fell for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, how concerned do you think we should be? I know you talked about how did they get the access to perpetrate this vuln anyways, and to, I guess, load the driver up, the vulnerable driver. How big of a concern do you think BYOVD, bring your own vulnerable driver, should we be concerned about that in and of itself, or is it really the attack that happened before that allowed them to do it?
Yeah, I think it's the root attack that's the big problem there, because whether it's a BYOVD or it's a ransomware or it's some other type of attack, some other exploit, they had to get into the network first. They had to get access and escalate privilege and be able to laterally move and all those kinds of things that you have to do to actually make it an effective attack. And so, the fact that it's this type of an attack is way downstream, in my opinion.
Well, if nothing more, we have a new acronym to remember, and we love that in this industry.
We don't have enough of them.
No. Moving on. All right. Former Uber security chief found guilty of data breach cover-up. You may remember this story from 2016. U.S. federal court jury has found former Uber chief security officer Joseph Sullivan guilty of not disclosing a 2016 breach of customer and driver records to regulators in attempting to cover up the incident. The 2016 hack of Uber occurred as a result of two hackers gaining unauthorized access to the company's database backups, prompting Uber to secretly pay $100,000 in ransom in December of 2016 in exchange for deleting the stolen information. So here we go. High profile company with a breach. And what's your take on the story, and especially obviously the head of security sort of taking the fall for this one?
Well, I've been fascinated watching some of the commentary threads, conversation threads online, in that there seems to be this overwhelming jump to, oh, it's a cultural problem. And that's great, except for the fact that we are failing to realize that culture is made up of individuals. And so, in my opinion, I have to go back to, where was the personal ethical behavior and standards for the individuals that made up that culture, and then of course the CISO that made that decision to play along in that kind of a culture. So I think this really goes back to personal ethical behavior, and because it wasn't just somebody got breached, it was then he tried to cover it up or was participant in covering it up, and then knew a federal crime was being committed according to the charges, and decided that he was still going to keep that to himself. So should others be charged? Absolutely, in my opinion. I don't think he's the lone wolf here. But if it's a culture, then there's a whole bunch of individuals with ethical problems.
Yeah. And there seems to be a blurred line, right, between personal accountability and corporate responsibility here. That is interesting. And Uber has, it's been no secret that they've had their share of scandals over the years. In fact, something was recently published. Our producer brought to light. There's been the top 49 scandals perpetrated by Uber. So take from that what you will. But any thoughts on Uber itself, or like you said, that maybe the scapegoat aspect of this too, whether it's Uber or not Uber? I think that's a concern for CISOs and heads of security.
Yeah, and maybe not so much in the financial realm, but is Uber our generation's Enron? They're willing to do things to make money that seem to be, inappropriate, and it's come up time and time and time again. I don't know how you correct that, if other than to have the investigators, find reason that and evidence that there's something going on and charge them accordingly, appropriately. As far as blaming the CISO, I think it's wrong that he's the only one. But by the same token, he was involved. So.
Yep. And thanks to David Cross, who said the recent CISO case is very complex and not simple,
Exactly.
simple blame case. So we just like to make it sound simple, David, but I totally agree. There's always a little bit more nuance, especially in a story like this. All right, let's move on.
There's a great deal of nuance when you're not the person that's in the middle of it too. So.
Yeah, it's a little easier to discuss. That's for sure. Good point. Thanks, Patrick. So let's move on to another high profile story. A Twitter deal isn't done yet. Throughout this week, the world has been abuzz while the will he won't he saga of Elon Musk's arrangements to finally buy Twitter. The Delaware Court of Chancery approved Twitter to proceed with a limited investigation into whether whistleblower Peter Mudge Zatko contacted Elon Musk's lawyers prior to his previous attempt to back out of buying Twitter. This involved a May 6th email sent from an anonymous Proton Mail account claiming to be a former exec at Twitter, leading teams directly involving trust and safety content moderation, and offered Musk information on Twitter through alternate channels. So definitely, if nothing more, a very interesting story seems to continue to unfold. What do you think about the back channel activity here and one of the most significant high profile, I guess, takeovers in history?
Yeah, well, if they prove the back channel activity had any kind of illegal component, then obviously they have to go after it. But it sounds to me more like some of this is, Elon seemingly being a master of marketing and controlling and using the news cycle, as he's evidenced over the years, over and over again. So, I mean, I think that this in some ways has some of that smell on it, that it's being played to create interest in the story from the get-go. And where Twitter ends up, that'll be the real curiosity, is because Elon is not above using his resources for call it bully pulpit or whatever you want to call it. And so I would not be surprised if he does get quit Twitter to see it become in some ways nuanced, a nuanced ideological and political platform for his ideas.
Yeah, definitely. An interesting, as I was kind of looking at this, the 44 billion, I believe, is the price that was initially agreed that Elon indicated he'd like to move forward with the buyout, but there was a 21% increase in shares, which I thought was interesting when that letter was received. So there's money being traded as well here in the background as this kind of unfolds, which I think is an interesting sort of tertiary effect of all of what's going on.
Yeah, it's paper money too, and so the end result, may be that there's some attempt to control what's happening in the background by controlling the news cycle. That's not unheard of, and frankly, unless they're giving out insider information, there's nothing illegal about being in the news.
Yeah, it feels like a love-hate relationship too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's your security is terrible. You have bot accounts everywhere, and then being sued. And then I'm going to back away. Then Twitter saying, "Well, we're going to sue you for backing away." And now, oh, I want back in. So,
well, I can't tell if Twitter wants to be bought or not either. So that's the hard decision, or if Elon wants to buy them or not. So we've got
right.
two players, two parties that they seem to be a little bit bipolar in their decisions and what they want to do.
I think that's a good word. We'll just get our popcorn and keep moving.
Yeah.
So another next story, another Australian telco hit with breach. While Optus continues to deal with the fallout from its breach back in September, Australia's largest telco, Telstra, has confirmed it suffered a data breach at a third-party organization, exposing employee data back to 2017. It estimates that 30,000 people were impacted, with names and email addresses leaked. So we're seeing telecom companies being targeted more and more, although this was through a third party. Do you think that telcos should be held to a higher security standard because of their connectivity and obviously increasing dependencies on telcos for other organizations as well? What's your take on this one, Patrick?
Well, I think until we can start holding companies in certain industries to a higher standard, we need to start establishing a standard of some sort. Right now it's all industry or best practice or good practice or however you want to frame it. And so, maybe when we're talking about sensitive data, this would be a good opportunity for some consensus on standards for privacy of sensitive data. We've got 50 states, I think 37-ish or 39 of them all have varying degrees of privacy laws, and they're all just a little bit different. Some are the same, some are different. So, maybe it's time, as much as I hate regulation, for the federal government to step up and establish a standard. Once you establish a standard, then maybe we can start talking about whether or not certain industries have a higher standard necessary as a result of what they're handling.
And that's interesting. And speaking of standardization, I mean, what about the third party aspect, right? I mean, we talk over and over now about supply chain and third parties and becoming third and fourth parties to one another. And, how do we get the assurance that the controls are in place that we need of our suppliers and vendors?
Yeah, see, unfortunately, because of the lack of direct relationship, contractual relationship beyond your third party, there's not any really good way to enforce that except through, you must cascade down the standards that you agree with us. But that's a lot of reliance on hope and sometimes dreams. Maybe this idea of a standard of some sort that is a required business standard for security is something that could help out with that. I don't know. Again, I'm very reticent to want to get involved in setting regulatory standards, but there are so many competing interests here right now, and maybe that's the way to go.
It's hard to think of other solutions that would really help push this, materially forward in a standard way. So that's interesting. Let's move on and spend a few moments with our sponsor, Hunters. Hunters is a SaaS platform purpose-built for security operations teams, providing unlimited data ingestion and normalization at a predictable cost. Hunters help SOC teams mitigate real threats faster and more reliably than SIM. Learn more at hunters.ai. Okay, let's move on to our next story. So, ex-NSA employee charged with violating Espionage Act and selling U.S. cyber secrets. The former employee, Jara Sebastian Delke, appeared in federal court Thursday on charges that he attempted to transmit classified national defense information to an FBI agent he believed was a Russian operative in exchange for $85,000. Delke was only employed by the NSA for about 3 weeks before quitting on July 1st, but while he was there, had top secret clearance in his role as information systems security designer, according to the FBI. So Patrick, I think the glaring question is, why did it only take 3 weeks for this person to apparently get top secret clearance and have access to this type of information?
Yeah, and there's a few interesting points here in this. One is, I guess most people think that you don't start on the clearance process until you actually get the job, and that's not really the case. In most cases, you don't actually start in the job until the clearance is finished, and the clearance could take any number of weeks, months, or whatever it takes to get it done. So I feel fairly certain the clearance was in place. So then the question becomes, how strong was their data loss prevention, their data protection program? It sounds like, though, if they did a sting and caught him trying to sell it, that maybe they got a pretty good program in place, and insider risk is doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm not sure it's as bad a story as it sounds, because it was stopped before any data was lost.
Yeah, that's an interesting spin on the DLP. And then there's the question of, do you think $85,000 is a fair market price for national defense information?
The number of zeros is all dependent on your perspective. Everybody has a price in Texas. We say, we all know, we're just negotiating on price now. We're all trying to make a deal. We're just negotiating on price. So is it 85,000? Is it 8,500? Or is it 8.5 million? It's irrelevant. It's still trying to breach the data. So.
Yeah, and we're talking about somebody, assuming they did get the clearance, like you said, and go through the protocols. This goes back to the insider threat, how much trust, we have to give people access to do their jobs, obviously. So there's always a level of trust built in. Is there anything additional there that can be done to stop something like this from happening?
Well, I thought an interesting red flag, which it's not called out, but to me, that he quit within 3 weeks after getting a clearance like that and starting a job, and quit within 3 weeks, that would have been a huge insider risk red flag, in my opinion. And maybe that was part of what was used in setting this up. It's hard to say. We don't have enough information.
Agreed. So we'll move on to the next story. LA School District published LA School data published on Leaksite. The Los Angeles Unified School District confirmed that a ransomware organization began publishing exfiltrated data about its students online. The files appeared on the Leaksite for the Vice Society ransomware organization, known for targeting educational organizations. Sounds like a nice group of individuals. The attack occurred over Labor Day weekend, with the threat group issuing a ransom demand on September 22nd. The district did not negotiate or pay the ransom in accordance with advice from the FBI. Leaked data includes social security numbers, passport information, and secret and confidential documents, including psychological assessments of students. So what unique challenges, Patrick, here would a school district face? How would an organization that we know has sort of limited funding for its IT and security staff, how would they defend themselves against, arguably some pretty sophisticated threat actors here?
Yeah, so I'm going to take the same argument that many school teachers and advocates of school teachers have taken for years, that school teachers we entrust them with educating our youth, and yet we don't necessarily pay them an appropriate amount. And I think that's the same with respect to if you look at cyber or cybersecurity, especially, I don't know that we as taxpayers fund, especially public schools like this, sufficiently to be able to afford the kinds of tools and people to rise to that level of security. Everybody's working on a shoestring, but our shoestring is a whole lot longer than that of public school systems. And I think we have to give serious consideration to whether there's a funding issue that's allowing them to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess that don't go out and vote no on your school budget because they might have some ransomware protection built in there. Read the fine print.
That's true, and we never know. It's all speculation, but we also don't know that the budget that they are giving is necessarily going appropriately to some of the security items. Maybe there's some opportunity for the budget to be moved around a little bit differently and still give proper education and learning facilities to the kids and fund this. But when you have teachers that are out there having to fund their own supplies in their own classrooms, I think it's a much more systemic problem than just one thing.
And again, do you think that this is something where we need government intervention to help provide funding, training, resources to help with the security aspect?
Again, short of regulating and setting standards, I don't know that there's anything else we can do because it's all based in taxpayer dollars. And at least the way everything is generally designed, it's localities have the initial set of money with respect to the school districts because they're usually locally run. And then there's a level of state funding and a level of federal funding. But somehow that needs to be increased or realigned.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our last story. Fraud hitting P2P payment apps. A new report from the Office of Senator Elizabeth Warren found an increasing prevalence of fraud and scams using peer-to-peer payment service Zelle. Zelle is co-owned by Bank of America, Truist, Capital One, JP Morgan Chase, PNC Bank, US Bank, and Wells Fargo. Since the second half of 2021, data from four of these banks shows over 192,000 cases of fraud, resulting in over $213 million in losses using Zelle. Despite bank ownership, the report found that only 3,500 cases where banks reimbursed for the losses, and on average, they only reimbursed 47% of those funds. So the question here is, obviously there's a lot of big banks involved. Why so few of these fraud cases being reimbursed back to people? Aren't there regulations in place to sort of hold the banks accountable and the apps accountable for reducing fraud and paying back customers?
Yeah, and I guess it comes, for me, it comes down to looking at Zelle is a very open kind of app to use. And so there aren't a lot of specific controls on guaranteeing authentication of the target for where you're sending the money. It will pop up and say, hey, you're sending it to this person. But there are tons of warnings that say, make absolutely sure you're sending it to the right person, the person that you want to. So I think the banks have kind of relied on the fact that they're saying, hey, we warned you this is not super secure. You got to be sure, and we're out of it. It's not like credit cards where there are other checks. It's not like bank transactions and bank direct transactions that there are other checks and balances. This is pretty open. So I'd be curious to know, how are these people being scammed out of that? That would be the awareness that would help fix that problem. How do you get scammed into sending that much money that many times? And the other interesting thing to me is, if you look at those bank names, caught my eye right away. Sean, you're in GRC as well. Those are many of the same banks that got together and formed a coalition a couple years ago and bought a small GRC company. And now they are trying to force that GRC company onto vendors as their third-party assurance company. So they're trying to ultimately build a revenue stream on doing third-party assurance. I gotta wonder what's going on with all of that too.
That's an interesting twist, and thank you for your thoughts on this and all the stories. The time has gone super quickly. We're already at the end of time, so I will ask, of the stories we went through, Patrick, were any particular stand out as a thumbs up or an eye roller for you?
Well, I'm most interested in the Uber story because, again, I think that the hardest thing we deal with is doing the right thing all the time, even when nobody's going to see you. And so I think that's a huge hat tip to ethical behavior all the time.
All right. And where can people find you in the interwebs if they are so inclined, or maybe in the phone book?
I think I'm fortunate enough that they're going to pop up my LinkedIn there, but LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to get me. And I'm pretty responsive and pretty open to connecting. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. Thank you to our guest, Patrick Benoit, VP of Global GRC, and BISO at CBRE. Thanks also to our sponsor, Hunters. Help your SOC mitigate real threats faster and more reliably than SIM. A reminder to join us next week for Super Cyber Friday. Our topic of discussion will be hacking data protection, an hour of critical thinking about what works best to protect, track, and know who is trying to access your critical information. That'll be followed by the Week in Review show. And in the meantime, you can still get caught up on your daily cyber news fix through cybersecurity headlines every day in about 6 minutes. Until next week, I'm Sean Kelly, and for Rich Stroffolino, who would want me to wish you all a very sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.